Responses to the interviews I've had with Lord Monckton and Professor Robert Lindsay, arguably the world's most eminent climatologist, response to that, both of those, has been overwhelming, and I must say that includes the response to the interview with Malcolm Turnbull. Lord Monckton said of Professor Lindsay, the American atmospheric physicist, he knows more about the atmosphere than anyone else alive. Now remember, we've got people here who must think it's April Fool's Day every day. Professor Garneau, an economist, who's a so-called expert on climate, advising our Prime Minister, telling us that the Murray-Darling Basin will be barren in Australia, the Barrier Reef will be destroyed, skiing in Australia will be a thing of the past, our economic output will decline by 4.8% annually, real wages will be slashed by 7.8%, so lie down and let the global warming truck roll over you. Remember recently the tides were going to rise to such an extent that everything from Manly to Dubbo would be washed away. Professor Lindsay told me he'd measured the effect of greenhouse gases on temperature, and he told me the models being used were disastrously exaggerating, his words, the warming effect of greenhouse gases, and that it was the height of human arrogance to think that we could control climate change, which he said will go on all the time. But of course, he said politicians love presenting apocalyptic scenarios that will catapult them and the scenarios into the headlines. He made the point there's been no global warming for more than a decade, even though carbon dioxide emissions have continued to increase. Yet here we're facing a tax that's going to cost us the earth. Lord Monckton made the point to me about the treaty that's to be signed in Copenhagen. We've been told nothing about this. Mr Rudd's last speech on all this nonsense was April 16. We have no economic models, no information about Copenhagen, no information about what's been agreed to at meetings that have been held around the world, Barcelona, Bangkok, wherever they want to go, Penny Wong and a lot of them. But Lord Monckton made the point that if the treaty is signed, it will take precedence over our constitution, and you won't be able to resile from the treaty unless you get the agreement of all other state parties. Lord Monckton ended his speech at St Paul, Minnesota, with the words Winston Churchill used, quoting from the American poet Henry Longfellow, when he said, "Sail on, O ship of state, sail on, union oaths strong and great. Humanity with all its fears, with all the hopes of future years, is hanging, breathless, on your fate." I mentioned to you earlier this week that Galileo in 1608, the brilliant physicist and astronomer, was taken to court by the so-called scientists of the day, who were of the opinion that the world was flat and that the sun rotated around the earth once a day. Galileo was convicted of heresy and sentenced to confinement to his home because he dared to contradict the scientific geniuses of the day. We also heard that Malcolm Turnbull hasn't read or seen the treaty. We're not told how much money is going to be distributed from a country like ours to underdeveloped countries, yet the treaty talks about transferring wealth from countries of the West to third world countries because we've been burning CO2 and they haven't. We've been screwing up the climate and they haven't. Well, what are we to do with politicians who are going on with this rubbish? Antoine Laurent Lavoisier is the founder of modern chemistry. He discovered oxygen. He identified carbon dioxide as the product of combustion of carbon in air. He laid down the theoretical basis of modern chemistry. The Lavoisier Group was incorporated in Australia in April 2000. At the time, the founders were concerned that the Australian government might ratify the Kyoto Protocol without proper understanding of the scientific claims on which it was based or of the economic implications of this decarbonisation regime which the ratification would have required. Well, here we are now approaching December 2009. Yet another international conference to design a successor treaty to the Kyoto Protocol in order to achieve worldwide decarbonisation. Well, a Lavoisier Group, which was formed in 2000, is now arguing that this conference is heading for the same rocks which have shipwrecked every other attempt at global decarbonisation. The refusal by the developing world, particularly India and China, to abandon their plans to lift many hundreds of millions of their people out of abject poverty. The Lavoisier Group has a network and a website, www.lavoisier.com.au, but its board has as its president one Peter Walsh, AO. Peter Walsh is the former outstanding finance minister in the Hawke government. He's been president of the Lavoisier Group since the year 2000. Well, yesterday in Melbourne, Barnaby Joyce launched their latest publication, Back to the 19th Century, Australia under the Carbon Pollution Reduction Scheme. It makes the point that this issue, Copenhagen, is so momentous in Australian history, listen to this, that an election should indeed be fought over it. and that Australians should have a clear choice to make, yes or no, to the decarbonisation of Australia. It further said until the Liberals can resolve to unite behind a no position, as they did on bank nationalisation in the 40s, Australians will not be able to choose, and our democracy will be diminished as a consequence. Peter Walsh, in a foreword to the book, said that if this carbon pollution reduction scheme legislation is to come back to the Senate in November and is supported, quote, Peter Walsh, and his family were wheat farmers in Western Australia, he said, it will take wheat growers back to the life they lived in the 1930s and earlier. Peter Walsh, quote, for Australian farmers, the weeks leading up to the Senate vote in November will be the most critical weeks, Peter Walsh, in the history of Australian agriculture. He wrote, I hope every senator will reflect most carefully on the damage, not only to farming, but to every energy-intensive industry which will follow from the passage of this bill. That's Peter Walsh, AO. The former long-time Finance Minister in the Hawke government, Barnaby Joyce, has joined me in the studio. Good morning.
Morning,
what more needs to be said other than what Peter Walsh has said?
Then we had to listen last night, Alan, to jury Al Gore telling us that we have to become vegetarians.
While he flies his planes around the world.
That's right. I mean, these people will not be happy till we return to eating roots and herbs. It's a madness. It will make Charles Mackay's books on the popular delusions of crowds and another chapter. If we don't stand up and knock this thing out, it will do immense damage to our economy. It is perverse to think that a new tax is somehow going to be instrumental in making a new economy. We didn't tax people who walked to develop the wheel. We didn't tax horses to develop the car. How on earth is this ridiculous idea that we're going to tax everything that emanates from carbon, which includes your beef industry, your sheep industry, your wheat industry, your coal industry,